as many of you know, there is obviously there's a big kind of wave of a lot of wave of outrage going on regarding abortion right now, because the state of Alabama recently passed a anti-abortion law that pretty much restricts abortion to its absolute depths. There's at this point, and the bill is already passed, and it's been signed into law by the governor, who's a female, by the way, an older woman. I forgot what her name was, but she's actually the new Alabama governor. But she's obviously very right wing, and she signed this bill into law. So it's kind of creating this wave of anti-abortion legislation coming up in other states. I think Louisiana's doing it. I believe Missouri is doing it. Those are the other two that I can think of, but there's a big fear that this could lead to a lot of other states doing the same thing. So, in relation to that, I kind of came across an article from about almost 2 months ago. It was late March. March 29th this year, to be exact, from the New York Times, where they covered the past abortion views of Joe Biden when he was still in the Senate back then too, actually, because he's, if I'm correct, I believe I'm correct in assuming that Joe Biden has been in the Senate his entire career. He hasn't been in any other political position, obviously, of course, if you don't count VP, Vice President of Barack Obama. But as far as when it comes to the legislative branch of the government, the only seat that he has had is in the Senate, and that was in his home state of Delaware. I'm sorry, not his home state. Home state is actually Pennsylvania, but his the other state that he resides in. So he does not have he has a very checkered past when it comes to the issue of abortion, and this was covered very substantially in the New York Times in this article, and I wanted to read it for you guys, and we can discuss it afterwards, or just discuss it as I'm reading in between. So the title of the article is "When Joe Biden Voted to Let States Overturn Roe v. Wade." So obviously, as you know, Roe v. Wade is the Supreme Court case that allowed abortion to be legalized in the United States. A lot of people are fearing that might be overturned because of this Alabama law, and since the Supreme Court is currently in the hands of how many conservatives How many conservatives? I believe 5 or 6, I think. So there's a big fear that might happen right now. So let's check it out here. So it says, it was a new era in Washington in 1981, and abortion rights activists were terrified. With an anti-abortion President Ronald Reagan in power and Republicans controlling the Senate for the first time in decades, social conservatives pushed for a constitutional amendment to allow individual states to overturn Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court ruling that had made abortion legal nationwide several years earlier. The amendment, which the National Abortion Rights Action League called the most devastating attack yet on abortion rights, cleared a key hurdle in the Senate Judiciary Committee in March 1982. Support came not only from Republicans, but from a 39-year-old second-term Democrat, Joseph R. Biden Jr. Let's see. So it says here. It's a quote from him, actually. It says, "I'm probably a victim or a product, however you want to phrase it, of my background," Mr. Biden, a Roman Catholic, said at the time. The decision, he said, was the single most difficult vote I've cast as a U.S. Senator. The bill never made it to the full Senate, and when it came back up the following year, Mr. Biden voted against it. His back and forth over abortion would become a hallmark of his political career. Yeah. So the next paragraph here says, as Mr. Biden prepares for the possibility of a third presidential run, women's rights leaders and activists in both parties are recalling these shifts on abortion, which are likely to draw fresh scrutiny in a Democratic primary race where women are expected to make up a majority of voters. Let's see. Mr. Biden entered the Senate in 1973 as a 30-year-old practicing Catholic who soon concluded that the Supreme Court went too far on abortion rights in the Roe case. He told an interviewer the following year that a woman shouldn't have the sole right to say what should happen to her body. By the time he left the vice president's mansion in early 2017, he was a 74-year-old who argued a far different view, that government doesn't have a right to tell other people that women, they can't control their body, as he put it in 2012. And I just wanted to say as an aside that Hillary Clinton was the nominee in 2016. Her choice for her VP was also a Roman Catholic, and that's Tim Kaine of Virginia. She chose him as her VP. A lot of people in the progressive movement found that as an issue because he is very, very centrist. He's very establishment. He is also, I guess, on the principle of his religious beliefs, is anti-abortion, but apparently he's pro-choice. Regardless, but he has had like anti-abortion views. So it's very curious when these choices are made for VP. I mean, that's a very important, pick to many people. I don't think it's as important when it comes to that person actually being the VP, because when you're the VP, you are basically doing all the stuff that the president does not want to do. So you're basically like a lackey to the president. You're like his servant, essentially, in many ways, his or her servant in many ways, because you just do whatever that president doesn't want to do, while the president handles all the big issues. And the VP obviously will give advice, and they'll chime in on some things here and there, but a lot of times they'll attend funerals and go to different events that the president is not able to do because they're busy with their own stuff. So a lot of times the VP will take over that role. So I think that's, I think when it comes to the context of choosing a VP for the actual race that's coming up in the general election, I think it's a big deal, because that sways a lot of people to be like, oh, okay, so what is the judgment of this person when they're choosing them as their VP, and honestly, like I said, they do a lot of times the VPs do give advice to the president when they're in office. So obviously that has a role too, but I don't think it has that much of as much of an impact as people think it does. But like I said, I think it has a much bigger impact, comparatively. It has a much bigger impact to an actual presidential race, even when you so when that team, so that ticket is running for re-election, that's also a big deal too. So but I think it's a big deal in that sense, and that should be, obviously you can, different people can look at it in different ways. That's just my take. I just think it's not as important as people make it out to be, but it's obviously a much bigger deal when you're, deciding to run in that, for that actual presidential race in that general election. So let me continue here. It says, abortion has long been a difficult issue for Catholic Democrats, and leaders, including former Governor Mario Cuomo of New York, Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, and Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. Many Catholic Democrats in government have cited their faith in explaining their personal opposition to abortion while taking stands to support abortion rights, and in some cases also holding positions in favor of some abortion restrictions. A Pew Research-centered poll last fall showed Catholics divided on whether abortion should be legal. It says, but some of Mr. Biden's more moderate to conservative stances in his legislative record are raising concerns in the party about whether he could win over an ascendant liberal wing eager to impose purity tests around issues of race and gender in 2020. Even before announcing a candidacy, Mr. Biden has started trying to rebut those concerns, telling party officials in Delaware this month that he has the most progressive record of anyone running for president. So when it comes to Biden stating, he's said this many times, this whole thing about how he's the most progressive this and the most progressive that, I mean, these are just like very like cliche rebuttals to people calling him out on substantive issues. And since he doesn't have much else to say other than, oh, well, I'm very progressive and I'm very consistent and I'm very this and I've fought for the American people. So he just throws out all these like platitudes about how he's, you know, a great guy, even though his record from I don't know how many years ago is completely different. You know, he doesn't have much of a response other than to put something like that out. Now, to be fair, yes, people can change over time. You know, people can, you know, change their positions. People can evolve. People can progress. You know, people, you know, even Bernie Sanders, you know, as much as people love him, you know, in the past, maybe he had some, well, then again, honestly, Bernie Sanders was actually a lot more to the left before. So people love him for that. Now, maybe he's not as leftist as he used to be. If you look into his record, he was much more anti-interventionism. He was much more pro, like, different, like, communist, much more, I would say, sympathetic to communist ideology, much more sympathetic to like socialist ideology. And to a lot of leftists out there, that's not a big problem. I'm kind of in the middle. I'm not really that bothered by it. I mean, but then again, I mean, since I'm not a communist, I'm not a socialist, I'm a progressive. So, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with everything that communism, socialism puts out. So I'm not going to immediately agree with everything that those things have, that those ideologies stand for. However, when it comes to leftist ideology, I feel that as far left as you can go, you can get, you have a better chance of getting far left policies enacted and passed. So I'm okay with, you know, ideologies that go far to the left, as long as they don't become any kind of, you know, authoritarianism or fascism, then I'm okay with it. Obviously, that's not the case in today's form of leftism. That doesn't require any kind of fascism or authoritarianism. A lot of the right wingers say that, but that's bullshit. So I'm not of that opinion. I would have to be stupid to think that, because that's just not the case. But you know, we're getting off into a little bit of a tangent here. But all I want to say is that Bernie Sanders has changed his views. Joe Biden has changed his views. Whatever, you know, Hillary Clinton, all these different people have changed in a lot of ways. But the difference is that when Joe Biden changes his views from, you know, it's different when Joe Biden says, okay, I was anti-abortion, or I was pro-life, or whatever they call it when they're the Catholics. I don't know, whatever it's, you know, labeled the Catholics that he used. But whatever they are, when they were like that before, that's one thing when you were like that in, you know, 20, 30 years ago, or however long it was, 40 years ago. That's totally different than when you're changing your views now, because a lot of his views now, maybe on abortion he doesn't, but on a lot of other things he's willing to so-called compromise. So Joe Biden will be the type of person who will happily go out there and just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to compromise, so-called compromise on regulating Wall Street. I'm going to compromise on, you know, doing entitlement cuts. I'm going to compromise on tax cuts. I'm going to compromise on, you know, the defense budget. You know, he's going to be in favor of the right-wing positions of these kind of different issues, you know. So he's going to take the right flank on those kind of things, just because he thinks, well, I have to compromise, and that's just what I have to do. I don't think that's compromise. I think that's selling out. It's, you know, and I was having a lengthy, back and forth debate with a troll on Twitter recently, and they honestly couldn't understand the idea of compromise. They thought compromise was like, yeah, you can totally sell out and totally give in to, or at least that's the way I was putting it, the fact that you're selling out, your specific views. But that person was, making excuses for the fact that you can just like take this position and just like, okay, well, it's good. I call it compromise. I think it's a compromise, but in reality, it's not a compromise. And, whether it's, being in favor of wars and, cutting taxes for the rich and then not doing that much on climate change, that's another issue that's a lot of people are taking with Joe Biden. But, when you hedge on those kind of things, and when you hedge is like, that's the slightest bit of, bit of so-called compromise that you can do. Hedging is just like, oh, I'm just gonna like give in a little bit, but like these people hedge to the point of just like going way too far, and that's what the likes of Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, all these kind of people do. So it's much different to say that I'm willing to compromise on this issue or that issue compared to like I'm just gonna completely sell out my position, sell out the people that I said I was going to do A, B, and C, and then I completely do something else. So that's not what Joe Biden, Joe Biden's not compromising. He's selling out. So again, if you're going to progress from, 30 and 40 years ago and your views are going to progress and you're going to evolve, that's a different story compared to right now when you claim you're doing the same kind of evolution and progress when you're really not. So he says, oh, I'm the most progressive, I have the most progressive record. No, you don't. That's bullshit. And he just says that because he has nothing else to say. He doesn't have any other response to come up with when it comes to the issue, various issues. At least in this case, we're talking about abortion. And, it's, that in that case, fine, maybe he did. But on a lot of other issues, that's not the case. So he just uses the same platitude and cliche talking point that he does for other issues. He's using it for abortion now. Here it says, this is quoting Elise Hogue, who's the president of NARAL, which is a abortion rights organization. She says, anxiety is super high among women across the country. Joe Biden is trying to carve out a space for himself as the middle moderate candidate, and he's going to have to really get with the times and understand that standing with abortion rights is the middle moderate position. I agree with that. She added, I can't tell you if he's there or not. Says Mr. Biden is already facing criticism from some women's rights groups, some women's rights activists over his aggressive questioning of Anita Hill during the Supreme Court confirmation hearings of Judge Clarence Thomas in 1991. We covered that on last week's show, and that, they didn't even show Biden's comments. I wasn't able to get into the specific comments that he made regarding his questioning of Anita Hill, but what they were showing in the clip that I showed, which was a Vice clip, Vice News clip, they were showing a lot of Republicans, and there might have been a couple Democrats, I don't know, but there was just like a lot of people that were like questioning Anita Hill for like, oh, are you writing a book, and are you, doing this for, is anybody paying you, and like, so people were like making a lot of those idiot, members of Senate Judiciary Committee, they were making a lot of stupid statements, and they were, and the whole time Joe Biden was sitting there as the chair of that Judiciary Committee, and he wasn't, he wasn't like even like opposing any of the questions that were being stated by these questions that were being put out there by these other members of the committee. But to be fair, I don't know what he said, so maybe it details it in this article, or maybe I'll look for it and I'll play it for you guys. But according to this, let's just see what this article says, and then maybe we'll see if we can find the video. It says Mr. Biden's comment Tuesday that he wished he could have done something to give Ms. Hill's claims of sexual harassment a more respectful hearing drew fierce backlash from critics who pointed out that Mr. Biden was chairman of the Senate committee that questioned Ms. Hill. Some women's rights leaders say Mr. Biden must offer a stronger and more personal apology to Mrs. Hill, as well as clarify his views on a broad range of issues, including sexual assault, harassment, and Republicans' effort to limit abortion access. says Mr. Biden has spoken warmly about some Republicans and bipartisanship in recent months. So, like I said, this article is from March 29th, so late March of this year. So this is before, I believe this is before he declared, right? Yeah, because he declared in April, I believe. So he made obviously whatever testimony, however he was involved in any kind of testimony in back when he was the chair of that committee, and then Anita Hill got questioned and all that stuff. So whatever comments he made, he had so we covered it on last week's episode of the Progressive Square, and we highlighted how he went on The View. And he had some other comments, I think, that he might have made to just kind of like the press in general, where he said, yeah, I could have done a lot more, but I don't think I did anything wrong. So he was just like totally contradicting himself, especially when it came to the interview that he did on The Hill, which, again, I covered on last week's show. And he can contradict himself. Yeah, I could have done more, but I don't think I did anything wrong. So, and they didn't really press him that much. I mean, they did question him, like why. I think it was Joy Behar or somebody that was questioning him, saying, why didn't you come out sooner and make the statement sooner instead of waiting so long? Blah blah blah. His wife just made a totally ridiculous comment saying we should just move on from this, which was ridiculous. That's a very elitist. Kind of white person point of view to take on an issue that is involving a black woman who was clearly treated with ridiculous contempt by a bunch of white white senators, so white politicians, white male politicians, not even any females. I don't know if they were pressing. I don't know if there was any females on that committee, but I didn't see any. But yeah, I don't know if any females criticized Anita Hill, but that video alone that showed all the men criticizing her was bad enough to show what kind of contempt was being shown for her just for coming out and saying that Clarence Thomas, sexually harassed her and sexually assaulted her. So the rest of the article doesn't really get into that much detail on anything. It just kind of goes over the different views that he's had, and then how he's evolved. They quote a couple of people that are like some religious outreach people. What is this? Oh, yeah, former head of the religious outreach of the DNC. I don't know. They're probably a lot of those people are probably gonna defend him or something. It says that he drew praise from some people for questioning, from supporters of abortion rights for questioning another judge that was about their opposition to a ruling that struck down birth control bans. So, I mean, again, like I said before, Joe Biden has evolved on the issue. Yeah, this is just kind of like the rest of the article is just going through his years of evolution, essentially. So he has done that. It says in 2003 he backed a third ban that included no exception for the health of the mother. Sponsored. Hold on. So he did involve or didn't evolve. So there was blah blah blah. It says it did not, as I would have liked, ban all post-viability abortions. He said, backing a proposal by Senator Tom Daschle that would include an exception if the mother's health was at risk. I was and still am concerned that in banning on partial birth abortions, we do not go far enough. So you want to go even farther. Wow. Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. He constantly flip-flops. And then it says he sponsored a bill by Rick Santorum, who's one of the biggest fucking right-wingers that has ever held a position in the Senate. Santorum also pushed for something, and then he backed it. So Biden backed that as well. And yeah, so I mean, and it says when Mr. Obama picked him as vice president more than a year later, some abortion rights advocates worried about Mr. Biden's record, but they felt confident that Mr. Obama's more liberal views on the issue would prevail. Recalled Kate McKeilman, a former leader of NARAL. Joe Biden continued his evolution on the issue under Obama. He got there. She said, I can't say for absolute 100%, but I would trust him as president to protect and defend women's rights to choose. See, I don't agree. Like, I don't believe, like, he can't be trusted on that. If you're evolving in 2008, right? So that was just over 10 years ago. If he's evolving in 2008 after being chosen as VP and then during being VP, I mean, isn't that a little long? I mean, talk about taking your time. And this was after, again, like I read it from this parts of this article, where he was siding with the likes of Santorum, and he was pushing for bills that were putting a ban on partial, like, post viability abortions and partial partial birth abortion. Yeah. So either way, I mean, it just seems like generally from the tone of this article, it seems, and just based on what I'm reading, kind of like a cursory viewing of the rest of this article, it seems like Joe Biden obviously has never been consistent on the view on the issue of abortion. He constantly keeps jumping back and forth. 1 second he's for it, 1 second he's against it. I mean, make up your mind, man. You're either for it or you're against it. And it just seems like he wants to constantly be on specific sides of the issue that either will benefit him politically or that it's benefiting his religious views. So you don't know if he's standing up for something that has to do with his religious views, or it's standing up for what he believes that his, like, what the views of, like, the Democratic Party and kind of like that liberal point of view, pro-choice point of view. So I don't even know. I mean, right now, okay, he's pro-choice, but he's just hasn't been consistent with it. It just has not been a consistent point of view of Joe Biden to maintain a position on abortion and just stick with that, and then promise people, like, listen, I'm not going to stab you in the back. Now, if he becomes president, I don't think we're going to be seeing Joe Biden, like, being like, oh yeah, we're gonna be putting a ban on partial birth abortions and this, and, like, I don't think that's gonna happen. So I mean, objectively speaking, I don't think we're gonna expect any kind of, like, just a complete flip flop if Biden is president, because he knows the impact that's gonna create among the Democratic Party, and they're just gonna be like, flipping out if he were president. Obviously, I'm not. I definitely don't hope I definitely hope he doesn't become president. But if he were to, I mean, I don't think we would expect him to become like that, to just flip again, just because he knows the political impact. But again, this doesn't. When it comes to his views of abortion, I think he's going to remain consistent on abortion, and he's going to remain pro-choice. But this is the larger picture of this, is that he is not going to remain. He's not going to be able to be consistent on any issue. You don't know what he's going to flip on. Just like the issues that I was talking about before, whether it's healthcare, whether it's regulating Wall Street, climate change, all these different issues. It just seems like he just can't. When it comes to war, he's voted for the Iraq War. He voted for the Patriot Act. When it comes to foreign policy and stuff like that, like, and just like the Constitution and stuff, like, he just doesn't give it. I think he was even against flag burning, which, just reminds me of Hillary Clinton, another issue that she was in favor of that was ridiculous. He was against flag burning too. Flag burning is a constitutional right. So see, you can't trust anything that these so-called Democrats, I don't know, what do you want to call it, liberal Democrats say, because they're not. They're just right-wing Democrats. It's what they really are when you look deep into their views. And you just can't trust what they're going to say, because 1 second they're going to say one thing, next second they're going to say another thing, and a lot of it is just going to be stuff to say so they can please their loyalists, and then get into office, and then when they're in office, then they're just going to completely flip. So I can't trust Joe Biden when it comes to that. When it comes to this kind of stuff, abortion is one thing, but when it comes to just, kind of like a general landscape of progressive issues, he is definitely not the most progressive, as much as he wants to repeat that. So that's just obvious to me. Should be obvious to everybody else too.